Good morning, Orlando, and welcome to Design Dialogues hosted by Fablis. This is your host, Bhavya, and today we have the pleasure of speaking with Orlando of FMT EStudio in Utah. Just to give a brief introduction about your studio, FMT EStudio is an architectural studio based in Utah. They specialize in creating spaces that harmonize with natural environment, offering clean, conscious designs that reflect both clients' inner world and the site's unique characteristics. Their expertise spans a variety of projects, including family residences, artistic retreats, remodels, and commercial spaces such as restaurants and galleries. They also provide tailored services from architectural design to full construction management, ensuring the seamless realization of each project. Thank you so much for joining us today, Orlando.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
So before starting the questions, I would like to inform you that this interview will be published on the website of Fablis. So sign up to the Fablis website and you'll get the access to watch this interview. So shall we proceed with the questions?
Yes,
Yeah. So your studio, FMTE Studios ethos emphasizes on creating spaces that harmonize with the natural landscape of the Yucatan Peninsula. How do you approach site analysis to ensure this harmony is effectively achieved in your projects?
we take a lot of care and time on visiting the site, experiencing the site, and understanding the natural characteristics of it. We have very dry, let's say, dry and humid land. This duality needs to be understood from the site itself. So we cannot just see the paper of plants and think that the solution will be integrated into it. So once we have visited the site and understood the conditions, it can be trees. Mostly it's that the vegetation covering the site. It's very important because it provides the required shade for a building. Buildings cannot be just stand alone. They need a natural cover. And there's a condition of rocks on the side. There's not so much of topography, but understanding that we need to integrate the building into that. And then once the plan is established, we go back to the site, and it's always a back and forth. It's what we think, we prove on it, and then we get back with that feedback, and it goes like that.
So, Orlando, with reference to your project in Tirón, how did the irregular and the narrow plot, coupled with the reservation and the preservation of the highly dense trees, influence the spatial organization and the design language of the project?
It was the most important thing that defined the shape of it and the accommodation of it. This was not only narrow, it was also irregular. It was not in a straight line. It was narrow, and it started narrowing, and then it made a turn, and then it's continued to narrow. And in the path that we were seeing, in fact, Tirón means like long, narrow space. And so the trees that were there, we realized that were at least 25, 35 years old, which is, that time cannot be bought. And we needed to make sure that they had enough space to grow, to develop, and to allow other life forms to be there as well, because that's important in the side of the ecosystem. So we thought in this house, trees first, house second, and then we developed around that concept. And it was very enlightening because we realized that, in Mayan architecture, life happens outside. The Mayan house that you see, if you make a Google search, it appears as a little hut, like this shape, but life happens outside. So we paired that idea of living inside outside in this house. So if you want to go to a room, you need to traverse the outside in a controlled way, let's say. So the house was definitely shaped by that. It's interrupted. You see one room, courtyard with a tree, another room, courtyard with a tree, and we made sure that the transition was comfortable for the inhabitants uh, to dwell on it.
In the concept of El Tiron, which highlights the visible materials and the artistic finishes that you have applied. What specific techniques or the materials were used to celebrate the craftsmanship of the project, and how did they contribute to the project's overall aesthetic?
They are very intertwined with the aesthetic because that house is, let's say, brutalist in a way. The materials are applied raw, and there are a couple of them. We always use cement applied in different ways to make sure that textures and colors and shades sometimes guide us to this through this project. So one of the main techniques used in there was the, I should call it, raked cement. Gave this vertical texture that was creating a rougher look on the most impactful walls. So the main wall that divides the public, let's say, area of that house and the private area, since it's going to be looked in both ways as a very important wall, it was highlighted through that technique that is raking the cement, the applied cement, giving this a very playful texture with the light and the sun that changes every.
So, given the focus on minimizing the architectural footprint and the environmental conservation in this project, what innovative strategies or technologies were employed to ensure that the project harmoniously integrates with its natural surroundings?
It's mostly on the passive side that we work through architecture. So in regards of technology, there's a big discussion about what is sustainable or how it integrates with nature better. But in this case, what we needed to make sure about that was that the building itself respects the environment, and through overhangs and levels on the site, we made sure that the inhabitants could make use of the spaces and the architecture harmonious and, let's say, comfortable way. So it was mostly on that, because the use of other technologies such as, let's say, solar is contradictory to having trees. They will be covered and no energy will be gathered from that side. So it was mostly on the passive side that we made a building envelope that could provide that integration better.
Your studio describes building as the backdrops for life, enabling comfort and the connection towards the project. How do you balance aesthetic aspirations with practical considerations like climate, materials, and functionality in such a dynamic environment?
This is a very important question, as we have only 2 seasons. Most of, not the, I would say the rest of the world, but most of the world has, spring, summer, autumn, and winter. In here, it's not felt like that. You only experience dry season and rainy season. So we always take take a very sensitive approach in understanding the site. Does it flood? Is it too extreme in sun conditions? So it is vital to us to understand that, and our techniques are mostly, as I said, on the passive side to make the building comfortable, lit up, and most importantly, to allow it to breathe. As the humidity here, it's very high. We're like in a most of the year is 85%, 80% of humidity, and that can create very uncomfortable conditions for living and sometimes for storing things. Like houses have things like books and clothes, and many things that could be affected by that amount of humidity. So we're always looking for ways to allow it to breathe and not be stagnant in the house.
So the design of your project, Te Extraño, the design emphasizes on adaptability for the day and the night use of the project. What strategies or design elements were implemented to achieve this seamless transition?
Te Extraño, it's a restaurant, and even though it's under a big tree, trees tend to let the leaves fall. And once that happens, you're not protected from the sun rays anymore. So what we did is that we created three environments that could be used in different seasons and different times of the day, and was paired with, in this case, mechanical devices such as AC. We have one area, main area, that can be used any time of the year and of the day. But once you go to the outside in the terrace, you have the option to be either covered or not. And that cover is mostly for the heating conditions that we could observe on the site, meaning that that terrace can look up at the tree with leaves or not, and it's conditioned with AC in that area. And also we did use in that site specifically more heat resistant material on the terrace that's not covered. So if the sun hits that area, it doesn't provide with such let's call it a thermal bounce that you could feel exhausting you in that area. So that was main characteristic of that strategy.
So, were there any particular or unique difficulties in achieving the intended harmony between the various textures, materials, and the lighting elements in the project?
Yes, the most challenging one is that most of our processes of applying materials are not standardized with machines. We don't use technology as other parts of the world, so many things are applied by hand. We needed to be present to make sure that our quality standards are being met. Everything is was thought about in a very human scale condition, meaning that the panels of the different textures in the space were considered to be worked by one person in one day. So it's one segment divided into that, as opposed to the logical way of doing it in standardized procedures is doing the most ample area covered and the least amount of time. This was divided into smaller time frames to be achieved by a group of people, and we have to be very, very present in order to make sure that everyone is integrating correctly.
FMT Studio's portfolio includes culturally rich spaces like galleries and the conceptual retreats. How does the cultural heritage of the Yucatan influence your design process and the architectural choices you make for your projects?
We are always aware of what living here represents. Our conditions, as I mentioned before, are very dual. Prior dwellers of, mostly in pre-Hispanic culture, they had that very clear in their minds. So we're always taking hints about what the living conditions feel like. And also on the side of what, contemporary buildings are very rational, are very standardized. And what we try to achieve through culture, not by mimicking or plastering symbols of pre-Hispanic cultures, is trying to reminisce how they treated their spaces, how they lived in the open areas, and through some materials, some craftsmanship and understanding the work procedure of the masons, trying to be very involved in the process, trying to understand them, trying to be a part of this process is very important to preserve that cultural heritage and extend it not only because of nostalgia or this is what it was, but because it's very very logical. It's convenient and it's smart. Even I would say smarter sometimes that most of the what we're doing now with contemporary architecture in Yucatan, being unconnected to the site, unconnected to the characteristics of what we have at hand. This is very important to us as it enriches the experience of architecture.
With reference to your project, Dolores, how does Dolores reflect your perspective on the urban evolution and the role of architecture in the countering real estate speculation and while the promoting the culture and the social benefits of that area?
This is a very hard question, not an answering, but it's a heavy one. In Yucatan, we experience urban growth, and urban sprawl. And when that happens, it goes very fast to the outside of the peripherals of the city. The city ring is being, you know, expanding. So what happens on the inside is becoming what the outside is doing. And in that scenario and perspective, that was before, the conditions that made this city pleasant, that made this city livable, that made the city human scale, are being lost. And we need to be mindful about what we have because, like I said, it worked. And walking through that area in the Dolores project, you can tell that the neighbors are connecting with each other, that the neighbors know what's happening outside of their doors and they look after each other. So the strategy with Dolores is trying to preserve that urban scale and try to preserve that connection with the neighborhood and the street and also with nature as they do have front yards, which is rare. Every decade that goes by, we have less and less front yards, less and less presence of trees, which make the city unworkable because of the extreme heat that we experience, or dryness. Dryness is some seasons. And that project was to showcase the possibility of making something new, but without losing the essence of what it was. In fact, we tried, when we got the project, the client was very mindful about what it was, and we were glad to be working with someone that aligns with those values. And she said, this is what it looked like. This is what my research showed. And we understood that, and we're very, very glad to have that. So we gave the building those characteristics back, enhanced it as we need to be updating things to this time, but without them losing the conditions that made this neighborhood so proud and so beautiful. That was an example of that, and we hope that this empowers and enables other people to see this perspective that is possible and make it as well to make that effort in order to preserve the quality of the urban scale and space.
Sustainability and the conscious design are clearly very integral part to your philosophy. Could you share some specific techniques or materials that you frequently employ to minimize the environmental impact while preserving your signature aesthetics of your studio?
Yes, we are very aware of the fact that rains are very heavy, and this is just to cite one example as very specific. Rain carries not only water in this case, as if you have a tree on top of your house, which is the case in most of our buildings, because we try to be close to them because of the benefits that it provides. They have leaves, of course, they have flowers, they have fruits and things. So the element that carries those leaves and that material, that debris of the trees out of the building, has been shaped into a characteristical element of our studio. And that rain, it's very highlighted in our project. In the case of El Tirón, you can see it allows the water and those leaves to cascade outside of the roof and be guided through a channel that doesn't make the water when it crashes on the ground splash. That is to side one. And the other one is that we are very committed to applying materials in a human way, in a human scale way, because we do everything by hand. And if you see our buildings, you'll notice that there's a pigmentation that happens. We are always looking for ways of enhancing the environment through colors and textures. And you see the manual labor in our projects, that everything's handcrafted. Windows, doors, the walls. You see care for the detail, even on the on the most raw buildings, there's always an element that you can tell that it was carefully crafted to enhance this experience of living architecture.
So, Orlando, that was the last question for the day. Thank you so much for giving your precious time. It was a pleasure to have you here. And don't forget to sign up to the Fabulous website. Thank you so much, Orlando.
Pleasure.